All right, Miles, the time is finally here. Of course, it's a college football playoff semifinal. We waited all year to this. I'm going to talk about the Peach Bowl. We've got number 1 Georgia against number 4 Ohio State, and I'm going to give you the spread, the over/under, and the prediction right now according to the Vegas, and then we'll talk about the matchup a little bit. So right now, Georgia's a 6.5-point favorite over Ohio State. Of course, the game is being played in Atlanta in the Peach Bowl, so home field advantage a little bit there for Georgia. The money line is minus 267 to Georgia, and the over/under sits at 62. This is all according to ESPN.com. So, but before we take a deeper look into this game, Mice, doesn't it feel like Ohio State is getting very disrespected? This is the team going into the Michigan game of final week of the regular season. Many people thought they were arguably the best team in college football, right up there with Georgia. They have maybe the best quarterback in C.J. Stroud. Obviously, Bryce Young is right up there as well. They've got a bevy of just offensive weapons led by Marvin Harrison Jr., who's probably the best, wide receiver in football, maybe the best skill position player in football. Talented defense, NFL guys across the board, experienced coach in Ryan Day, championship program, championship culture. They've been there before. Yet, despite all of this, I can't find a single person that is even giving Ohio State a chance against Georgia here. Everyone is already almost preemptively, crowning Georgia. They won the national championship last year. This is just inevitable. They're going to win it again this year. No one is giving Ohio State a chance, which I think is very interesting because this Ohio State program has a very real chance to keep it competitive and even beat Georgia. Give me your thoughts on this matchup and everything going on with this Ohio State and what everyone's saying about this game.
Yeah, Nick, I think it's kind of crazy to not give Ohio State a chance and to try to poke holes in their argument this whole time without taking a look at Georgia first. Because if you go through some games this season, if there's a few key games I want to pick out here, Georgia's been kind of vulnerable at times. You look at, firstly, on September 24th, they played Kent State. Kent State was able to score 22 points on them, and they only scored, 39 on Kent State. That's a bad team that they should have, quite frankly, blown out, and I'll get to I have a comparison here in a minute. Then you look at the very next week against Missouri, 26-22. Again, Missouri's able to score 22 on them, and they could only score 26, barely edging out that game, Nick. And lastly, I want to point to the Kentucky game at 16-6, held for a low amount of points against Kentucky. Obviously, the defense did a great job in that game. But I just think overall, Georgia has had some slow games, but you look at similar stuff, like the Kent State is comped to potentially Ohio State's playing of Toledo, maybe a similar level team on that part. Ohio State scored 77 on Toledo. Absolutely blew them out of the water. They pulled back on the horses. The hardest game for Ohio State outside of Michigan this whole season, probably Northwestern, where they were able to score 21 and Northwestern only scored 7 on them. So they're able to get a little bit more going there. It's just, I feel like at times, Nick, Ohio State has pretty much beaten everyone very, very solidly up until the last game of the season, where at times Georgia has struggled against lesser opponents. So I think losing to a top 3 team in the country isn't that big of a deal, and we need to start to kind of look at some of the Georgia almost near misses there and be comparing those things. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? Everyone's kind of forgotten that Georgia has had their struggles this year because we've been focused on other games and other matchups, of course, trying to figure out who else shakes out in the college football playoff and how it all settled down. But I want to talk about matchups here for a second, because where Georgia has struggled over the last couple of years is against a team like Ohio State that has an elite level quarterback, that has elite level skill players, right? So in the SEC championship game last year, which was Georgia's only defeat last year when they went on to win the national championship, Alabama dropped 41 on them. And Jamison Williams, Bryce Young, and all those big play Alabama receivers had an absolute field day against Georgia's defense. They threw all over him. I think Bryce Young threw for almost 400 yards or something like that. They scored a bunch of points, obviously dropped 41 on him. Ohio State is the closest thing to that kind of offense that Georgia has played this year, and it's not even really close. In fact, they may be even better than the Alabama offense last year because, of course, you've got Marvin Harrison Jr., who I think he's one of the best wide receiver prospects I've ever seen in college football. He's absolutely outstanding. C.J. Stroud's unbelievably good as well. Ryan Day, smart offensive coach like I already talked about. So I think that's a threat Georgia hasn't faced. But I'm going to go back a little farther. This game really reminds me, Miles, of the first college football playoff semifinal. At least I think it was the first. Back in 2014, when number one Alabama was a huge favorite over Ohio State that just kind of snuck in as a number 4 seed. And Ohio State came into that game and they beat Alabama 42-35. Everyone was expecting Alabama to roll through and they were already crowning Alabama as the national champion. Ohio State came into that game, shocked Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, and just kind of went on to win the national championship over Oklahoma. I can see that kind of impact happening here because where it matters most, Ohio State is better. They're better at quarterback. And that's really all that matters in some of these big matches. We see it all the time in the NFL, and we see it all the time in these big college football games. Whoever is better at quarterback tends to win, especially in these warm weather, dome environments, right? Obviously, if it's cold and outdoors, different environment can affect it. We saw it at Michigan, obviously, this year. But here we go. The Ohio State is better at quarterback, not even close. I don't care what anyone says about Stetson Bennett. He's not even close to C.J. Stroud. It's embarrassing, in fact, that he was a Heisman finalist, in my opinion. Bennett didn't do anything remotely close except carry the football off all year. So I look at C.J. Stroud being much better than Stetson Bennett, and I really think with that advantage, Ohio State has a very, very real chance in this game.